My name's Sarah. This is Michael. I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. Today we're going to be discussing fueling young athletes. So let's jump in.
Yeah.
All right, so objectives today, discussing energy requirements, examining the macro and micronutrients. We're going to discuss the importance of hydration and then learn how to identify dehydration. Lastly, we're going to end with some game day nutritional considerations. If you guys have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or raise your hand. I'm not sure how this whole webinar thing works.
Just put it in the chat box if possible and make sure that it's put to go to all participants so we can easily see and find your questions.
And then we'll answer those for you. All right. So when it comes to young athletes, parents, caregivers, you guys are the main influencers in their lives. So they're going to look to you for guidance. Like with all children, young athletes, you rely on their parents for a lot of their food choices and to maintain their nutritional status. So think about that for a second. You guys are the one purchasing the items. Doesn't mean that they can't be involved. But if you're only providing certain things for them, that's all they have to choose from. So it's really a team effort. They're also heavily influenced by the media and their peers. So I'm sure most of you have had your kids come home and say, hey, Bobby's doing this, or I read this. So really just trying to help guide them through those choices. We're here today to help give you the knowledge, if you will, around what to do in fueling for sports. So hopefully that can help take some of those questions away. And then we just want to educate young athletes on good food choices, good beverage choices, especially as it pertains to sport.
Yeah, and the thing I think about there is that they're spending more and more time in school and less time in the home, or they're at school and practice and stuff. So there's a lot of time the way they're not around you, and there's they have to be able to know how to do make the right food choices on their own as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Whenever I'm counseling clients, I always say, I can tell you what to do, but I'm not going to be with you all the time. So you're going to have to make some choices on your own. So that's where that education piece is really helpful.
Yeah. So jumping into the energy requirements, these aren't necessarily exact numbers that you need to hit. The thing we wanted to point out here was the trend. So that typically boys are going to need more calories than girls. And then as you age, so moving up from that 6 to 7 year old age group up to the teens, energy requirements increase for both boys and girls. So metabolism is speeding up. We're still trying to fuel growth as well as all the activity we're doing. But there is also a lot of a huge amount of individual variation here. So you can't really, it's hard to take this chart and just say, oh, well, my daughter is 11, so she needs this many calories. It doesn't really work like that. Really the best thing you can do is get a metabolic test to measure exactly how many calories they're burning instead of trying to guess based off of this table.
Yeah, and just side note, this table is for those participating in heavy exercise. Like Michael said, metabolic test is the best route. We've had people, even twins, who've come in and their energy needs are completely different. So really getting individualized recommendations. This is just trying to show you an example. All right, so let's get into the good stuff, the macronutrients. So we have 3 macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat. Each are important, especially with sports. Carbohydrates, they're the main energy source for athletes. So the main fuel source, if you will. So the majority of their athletes' diet should be carbohydrates. Now, there is some exception. I know here on the slide you can see that around 45 to 65% of intake should be carbohydrates. Sometimes we'll go a little bit lower. Sometimes we'll go a little bit higher. It just depends on the situation and what activities they're doing. For carbs, you want to focus on things like whole grain crackers, pasta, bread, sports drinks are even a carbohydrate source. Fruits and vegetables are also carbohydrates. And we'll get into kind of timing of carbs and each macronutrient, when to have them, how much to have, things like that.
Yeah, and heading to protein. So protein is really important to help build, maintain, and repair muscle. So when we go to practice or we're doing conditioning and stuff, it causes microscopic damage to the muscle, which is good. We want that. That's how muscles grow and build and improve. But we want to make sure that we're getting enough protein to allow muscles to heal and repair and come back even stronger. So a lot of that, for most athletes, especially as active as they are, we really don't want to go below 1.5 grams per kilogram. So you can calculate that out fairly easily. You can plug in your weight into Google and say, my weight in kilograms, and then just multiply that times 1.5 to get a pretty good baseline. And we really want to spread the protein out throughout the day. So we don't want to eat all of our protein in one sitting or 2 sittings. We want to space it pretty evenly throughout the day, just so we can best absorb and utilize all of it. So protein's going to be like our lean meats, our fish, eggs, beans, things like that. There's also like your vegetarian and vegan protein sources like tofu and tempeh and stuff like that as well.
And moving on to the last macronutrient, fat. So fat's important. It helps cushion our organs. It helps with memory and cognition, temperature regulation, hormones. So all the things which are integral with being able to compete in sports. Fat is very calorically dense, so a lot of people can kind of be a little bit afraid of fat, but it's essential for the absorption of our fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. So with athletes, we want to make sure that we have enough of the healthy fats in the diet without having too much where we can see some unwanted weight gain. So it's got healthy balance. You want to focus on sources of healthy fats, so avocados, oils, nuts, seeds. Also, fats can help keep you full. So a lot of our athletes, there's two main issues that we see with young athletes. They're either not eating enough or they feel that they can't get enough to eat and they're always hungry because of the level of their training. So fats like adding an avocado to your salad or burrito bowl can kind of help fill you up a little bit more.
Definitely. Another thing that I like to think about, especially with like youth athletes, is that fat's really important for making hormones as well. So especially in that growing population where hormones are still getting all sorted out and everything, we want to make sure that we're getting an adequate amount of fat to fuel that.
Yeah, certainly. Good point. Okay, so now that we've kind of touched on each of the macronutrients, we're going to talk about how to put those on your plate and how to tailor your nutrition to match your training demands. Another common issue is that people will eat the same no matter what they're doing, and you don't want to necessarily consume the same amount of fuel for game day as you would for an off day, right? If you're consuming game day fuel on an off day, it might lead to weight gain. If you're consuming off-day fuel on a game day, you may not have enough energy to get throughout the game. So these next couple slides are going to show you how to tailor your plate and your portions, aka those macronutrients, to help fuel your training needs.
Yeah, and we really like this because you're not having to log your food and like analyze all these numbers. It's like at every meal, every snack, you can kind of just do this at a glance and see about how much you're getting and about how it's structured.
Yeah, it's relatable and practical because every single one of us eats our food on a plate or a bowl, right? You can picture this in that meal instead of having to either measure out your food or track everything in MyFitnessPal. So getting started. So this is going to be for easy training, an off day, or for weight management. So half of your plate, as you can see, we want those fruits and vegetables. They're going to give us some carbohydrates. They're also going to give us fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Going to help with immunity as well. On the other half of the plate, it's going to be split evenly between lean protein and then whole grains and healthy starches. So as we move through, I want you to notice what changes on these plates, and then we'll kind of give you the answer at the end. So once again, this is for easy training, weight management, or an off day. Sorry. Computer error.
I was like, that's weird.
I may look like a millennial, but I promise you I'm not. I don't know how to work technology. Okay, so moving on, as we increase our training up to like a moderate training, everything is split into thirds. So fruits and vegetables have gone down a little bit, lean protein's gone up a little bit, whole grains and healthy starches have gone up a little bit. And that's just because the more training that we're doing, so we went from easy to moderate, we need a little bit more fuel. And remember, our fuel comes from our carbohydrates, so we have a little bit more of those carbohydrates from whole grains and healthy starches. And then last, hard training. So as you can see on this one, half the plate is the whole grains and healthy starches, and then the other half is split between fruits and veggies and lean protein. So as we kind of rewind here, let's look at the whole grains and healthy starches. So for easy training, it's a fourth, moderate, a third, hard training, half. So as training increases, we want to increase those carbohydrates specifically from whole grains and healthy starches. That's our main source of fuel. Now, there are some exceptions, but that's kind of the main recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that macronutrient conversation we had about how carbs are our primary energy source. And so, like, the more activity you're doing, the more you're going to need of your energy source. It's like the more you drive your car, the more gas you need. Same concept. So as we're increasing the volume of our training, the intensity of our training, those needs go up. And so more of our plates need to come from the carbs and starches.
Yeah. And if you guys have questions or want specific recommendations, we can definitely help you with that. These are once again, general guidelines. All right, so we talked about the macros, the big ones. Let's talk about some of the micronutrients that athletes especially need to pay attention to.
Yeah, so especially for athletes, there's a few micronutrients that we really like to focus on, and especially young athletes, we really like to talk about calcium, vitamin D, and iron. So calcium and vitamin D kind of go hand in hand. You see it often in like your milks and stuff like that. They're fortified with calcium and vitamin D. Vitamin D really helps with calcium absorption. So calcium, as we all know, is really important for bone growth, bone health, things like that. So just making sure that if we can tolerate dairy, if we do dairy products, that we're eating some of those, incorporating some of those, but some of our vegetarian and vegan options, so like your dairy alternatives, also are fortified with calcium and vitamin D, or like tofu. And then we can also get a good amount of calcium from like our leafy greens. And then vitamin D we can also get from the sun. So not spending too much time in the sun. We're not trying to get sunburned and cause all those issues, but just, a little bit of sun exposure here and there does good things for us. And then moving into iron. So iron's really important for energy metabolism. Of all of our macronutrients, we kind of have to have iron to be able to use all those things. So especially young athletes are pretty prone to iron deficiency. We tend to either not be eating enough, or being athletic, we turn over more of it. So we kind of burn through it more. So the needs for athletes tend to be a little bit higher.
Not to mention all you young female athletes out there, you also have an added source of where you're losing iron every month. So we often see iron deficiency in a lot of young female athletes. So just something to keep in mind with some of our younger female athletes.
Yeah. And then to make sure we're getting enough iron, we want to pair those high iron foods with vitamin C rich foods. So, our leafy greens are a pretty good source of iron, but we want to make sure we're pairing those with sources of vitamin C, so like citrus fruits, things like that, to help that absorption and make sure we're taking in as much of that iron as possible. Our best sources of iron are going to be those heme sources, so like meats, and again, pairing with vitamin C just improves that absorption.
Yes, and going back to vitamin D, a lot of times we'll see vitamin D deficiency in the winter months, because yes, we can get vitamin D from some foods, but it's really hard. There's not that many foods. So specifically, we get it from sun exposure. If you are in a sport that is inside year round or inside in the cooler months, you're not going to be getting that sun exposure. Also, too, if you're in a sport that wears a lot of gear, if you will, for your sport, so football, for example, a lot of times a lot of the skin is covered up, so you don't have that sun exposure. So vitamin D, we often see that in athletes, as vitamin D deficiency in athletes as well. So just getting outside, like Michael said, you don't want to go sun tanning, but getting outside for maybe like 10, 15 minutes just to help with that vitamin D production.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so another big one, hydration.
Yeah, this is like the really, really, really big one that a lot of people are missing out on.
Do you want to
start us off? Especially our younger athletes are at an increased risk for altered fluid status is what we call it, but essentially poor hydration. Especially school-aged kids, you're in school a lot, sitting through class, you don't want to have to take bathroom breaks. Teachers are strict about bathroom breaks, and so you don't drink a lot of water during the day, so you don't have to go to the bathroom. And as you can suspect, if you're not drinking water, you're going to be dehydrated. So that's a big issue, especially in like I said, school-aged kids, athletes, but kids in general also are at an increased risk for dehydration. They have a harder time dissipating heat. When we're young, our bodies haven't really totally learned that process yet of shedding some of that heat and not sweating quite as much. Mm-hmm. So kids tend to sweat a little bit more. But some of our big signs of dehydration to look out for are like really dark urine. So it's probably the next slide, right? Mm-hmm. We have a chart that will show you guys to kind of monitor your urine color for hydration status. It's a really easy thing you can do just at a glance. But really dark urine is going to be a sign of dehydration. Not peeing very much, not peeing very frequently either. Muscle cramping, definitely that's the one we kind of all know, when your kid cramps up in the game, definitely a sign of dehydration. But you can also get headaches, some mental fogginess, some irritability occur too. And then really severe dehydration can cause nausea.
Yes, all things we would like to avoid.
Yeah.
So here's the P chart that Michael was talking about. So we around here like to come up with sayings to help us remember things or to help get kids on board. So we say P to be under 3. So basically you want your urine color to be 3, a color of 3 or lighter. So we always say pale lemonade.
Yep.
We don't want anything looking like iced tea or darker than that. So P to be under 3. So some recommendations around hydration. So you should select water if your activity's under an hour. If it's over an hour, that's where we can start to get into some sports drinks. However, we say the 3 H's. If it's hot, humid, and over half an hour, you want to start those sports drinks a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
So let me kind of break that down for you guys. So if it's hot and humid, you're going to be sweating more, meaning you're going to be losing more fluid and more electrolytes in that fluid. So we need to put those back a little bit sooner. The reason why water is okay for under 60 minutes is that we oftentimes have enough energy stored for that 60 minutes. So water should be sufficient to get you through. Now, after we've used that energy, I know Michael mentioned the fuel tank analogy, like in a car. So think of it as that. You have enough energy stored for a certain amount of time. As you use it, as we drive our car and use that gas, we have to fill it back up. So that's kind of where the sports drink comes in at that 60-minute mark. Anything else you want to touch on about hydration?
No, I mean, I think you covered it definitely with like as soon as it's hot and humid, our sweat rate tends to increase. And so we really want to start, I like to reiterate, we like to start the sports drinks a little earlier just to definitely make sure that we're getting enough fluid and electrolytes. That's really.
Yeah. Something that we haven't touched on that I think's a big issue when it comes to young athletes is just your schedule in and around school. Like I know when I was in school, we weren't allowed to carry a water bottle around school. It just wasn't allowed. I know some schools will allow that. So if that's the case, you should definitely carry one with you. Start to drink throughout the day, especially if you have a game that afternoon or that evening. And fueling can also be hard in and around the school schedule. Like I know some of the kids that I've seen, they eat lunch at 10, others eat it at 12:30. So it's really hard. I think maybe in like a slide or two, we'll get into timing and how to time your meals around your exercise events.
But I think the other piece of this, going back to the school schedule is like, this is one of those things where you have to advocate for yourself, or if you're a parent, help and advocate for your kid, talking to like the coaches, or I think especially around here, all the schools have to have an athletic trainer.
Mm-hmm.
And I know at least at like my high school, when I was in high school, the athletic trainer would go and like yell at teachers if they weren't letting athletes drink water during class and stuff and like go to the bathroom, because like this is a bigger issue. I mean, when they get to games or practices after school, like if they're cramping and stuff, that's a big problem. And so this is one of those things where if your kid or if you're a young athlete, you have teachers that won't let you go to the bathroom because you've been drinking water, potentially getting other people involved to like make sure that you can drink water in class and not be dehydrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. Good point. All right. So I know the slide says game day tips, so we're going to help get into timing around sports, around games, around practice throughout the day. So Michael, do you want to kind of?
Yeah, definitely. So we kind of break it all out here, but really the big things we want to focus on are pre-workout. So before our workout, about 2 to 3 hours before, we want to focus on carbs and protein. So like we talked about, carbs are that big energy source, the big main ones. We really want to make sure we have enough of those on board and we've topped up our fuel tank right before we go into games or practices. So having a big meal, carbs, protein, 2 to 3 hours before definitely puts us on the right foot. And then in that like 30 minutes to an hour before, grabbing like a smaller snack. So these are like the little energy bars, some fruit, something like that, just to kind of, again, make sure that we're just topped up and have enough energy to get us through practice, because we don't want to be exhausted and crash in the middle of practice.
Yeah, so why should they choose things like energy bars and fruit right before practice? What's the reasoning behind those snack items?
So especially right before activity, we want to choose things that are more heavily focused on the carbs and a little bit less on the protein, just to make sure that we process it and get it through the system and we can actually use that. So protein and fat both slow digestion. And so if we're eating like a really big, heavy, like protein meal right before practice, like if you're eating a giant, like 3 meat sub 30 minutes before practice, like you're going to be feeling it for sure. Like it's going to be backed up in your stomach and sloshing around. It's not going to be good. So we want to choose things that are good carb sources, like those energy bars, fruit, stuff like that, that we can process pretty quickly and make sure that we're using.
Yeah. And say you have a game after school. Say your lunch is at, like 10:30 or 11, you have one of those earlier lunches. This is where you could do a higher carb snack, but with something like a little bit more like a peanut butter and jelly to give you the energy for your game, since it's been so long since you had your last meal.
Definitely.
So there's definitely some timing things that you need to work out, and we can help you with that.
Yeah. And I mean, the piece of that is like, if you're going to do a bigger snack like that, you kind of want to back it a little bit further away. So more like the hour before than right before your game or practice, to make sure that you have time to process it.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so Michael's touched on what to do before. Let's talk about during. So that goes back to kind of hydration, where we talk about water, sports drinks. So if it's under an hour, so if it's just a practice or if it's a lighter practice, you should be fine just having water water during, because before you fueled up, right? You have all the energy that you need to get you through. If it's a longer practice, if it's a more intense practice, if it's 90 degrees or the middle of August in North Carolina, you might need something during that practice to keep your energy levels up. So that would be something like carbs and electrolytes, which oftentimes is easy to get in like a sports drink, right? Like a Gatorade, a Powerade, or Noon, any of those other products. It's just easier to take a sip of that than to stop practice and sit down and peel an orange and have that.
Yeah.
It's just not practical.
Yeah.
So if anything during, it really depends on the environment, the time, and the intensity will determine whether you need to put in more fuel in the form of carbs and electrolytes. Obviously, you always want to be sipping on water, keeping your hydration up during.
Yeah.
So do you want to do post? What to focus on after?
So afterwards, we really want to focus again on those carbs and protein. So protein to rebuild all the muscle that we've kind of taken a toll on during that activity, and then carbs to replenish that glycogen. So refilling our fuel tank to make sure that heading into the next day and heading into practice the next day or a game the next day, however that pans out, making sure that we are well recovered for that and have enough energy for that. So especially like as athletes, we have practice every day and then a game. We don't have like a whole lot of off days. And so we really have to make sure that we're doing the right stuff nutritionally to make sure that we're recovered and ready for the next day. So the stuff you do before practice or games and the stuff you do during it are just focused on that day. But the stuff you do afterwards is really focused on the next day, 2 days down the road, and get you prepared for that.
Yes. Also, too, when it comes to fueling in and around sport or just fueling in general, we also want to keep in mind food safety. So keeping our cold foods cold. If you're traveling, packing a cooler, or throughout the school day, a lunchbox with an ice pack, or picking foods that don't necessarily need to have refrigeration. So some of the energy bars, fruit cups, even the ones like that are packaged in fruit juice can be useful so that you don't have to worry about that.
Or those, like a specific product plug is like those Smucker's Uncrustable things, because they come out of the freezer, throw it in your lunchbox, and by the time like school's over, it's entirely thawed out and it's like perfect temperature to eat. So that's like a good, instead of having to make a peanut butter and jelly, you can just unwrap one of those.
Yeah, those things are great. I know a lot of collegiate athletes use those as like a pre-workout snack or recovery, just because they're so easy. Yeah. All right, so now let's do like a specific plan for game day nutrition, just to kind of really put it all together and show you what that could look like in food. Okay, so for this game situation, the game's later in the day, so maybe like an after school game.
It's your Friday football game.
Exactly, perfect. So your fueling strategy starts the moment you wake up, right? So you really have to have a good breakfast to get you started. With breakfast, we want to have a good amount of carbohydrates to give us energy, not only to get throughout the day, but also for later in the day when we have that game. And you also want some protein to kind of help fill you up as well. So something that you could do is scrambled eggs and turkey sausage with some fresh berries. You could do low-fat milk. You could have a Greek yogurt instead of the milk. There's a lot of different options. This is just one example. Now, that breakfast here takes a little bit more time to prepare, right? A lot of people may not want to prepare that in the morning or have the time to prepare it. So something else you could do is, have you ever had like the frozen waffles? You could pop some of those in the toaster, put a little bit of peanut butter, add some fruit on top. That could be an option for you as well.
Yeah, the other one too, like eggs tend to be a great protein source, and a lot of people really like eggs as like a breakfast food. So like making them in other ways that are quicker to grab. So doing like the baked egg cups or hard-boiled eggs, or like you grab a couple of them and you're out the door.
Yeah. And you can buy those pre-boiled.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes a lot of the work out of it for you. All right. So we've talked about breakfast. Do you want to handle a lunch?
Yeah. So then we also want to really make sure that we're eating a lunch, like game days, practice days. We don't want to be skipping meals at all. So again, emphasizing the protein, carbs, and then making sure we get fruits and veggies. So remembering that kind of plate that we talked about on game day, that's going to look a little different than, maybe your Sunday off day. So again, focusing on those lean proteins, chicken breast, some brown rice, some, broccoli, green beans, whatever sounds good. And then we can do some like non-fat chocolate milk, get a little bit more carbs there, some of the dairy, the calcium, vitamin D that we talked about.
Mm-hmm. I probably would also include a water in there or swap the water for the chocolate milk, depending on the goals of the athlete and the sport that they're doing.
Yeah.
Chocolate milk's great, but I tend to use it more in like the post-workout period as a great recovery beverage. If you're looking just to get extra carbs, I'd honestly rather do like a little bit more brown rice or veggies or like an apple even.
Yeah. But that's a good point with like the hydration piece. Is like you said when we started this was, if your game day nutrition plan starts the minute you wake up.
Get it out.
The minute you wake up. And so same is true for your hydration. Game days, especially practice days, we don't want to be dehydrated. So the minute you wake up, getting some water, making sure that we're starting that rehydration process, because 99.9% of people wake up dehydrated.
Yes.
So just getting on that. And then especially for school age, lunch tends to be a little earlier. So making sure that we kind of have a snack, whether it's like right after school or like between a couple of your classes, just having something you can grab to keep those energy stores topped up. Yeah,
I think the snack or the time between lunch and the game is where there can be the most variability, right? If you're in a school where you're fortunate enough to have snacks throughout the day, definitely have a snack in the afternoon. If you're in a school where that's not a possibility, then you need to eat something once school's done. Now, that depends on what time your game is, right? If you get out of school at 2 o'clock and it's our 7 p.m. Friday night football game, you have 5 hours. So you can eat almost like another meal before your before your game. If you get out of school at 2:30 and your game's at like 4, but your warm-up starts at 3:30, well, then maybe you have this small snack like what is on our slide here, a granola bar and a piece of fruit.
Yeah, so that goes back to that last slide, just kind of tailoring that to how much time you have really, and like kind of thinking about when your last meal was, when your next meal is going to be kind of thing, and kind of fitting it in there.
Yeah. So then afterwards, going back to what Michael mentioned in the post recovery, the post-workout, the recovery period, you want to make sure you have a mixed meal. So if you have enough time to kind of get yourself home and have a meal, that's great. If you know it's going to be a while, say you traveled an hour to your game and you have to travel an hour back and then get home and make the food, maybe you do something small like a recovery shake. A chocolate milk would be great then, but just something that kind of helps start that recovery process.
Yeah, definitely. So like if it's, a home game or whatever, and you're going to be home within an hour of the finish of the game, then like we can kind of worry a little bit less about getting something right after we get off the field. But I think so many kids are coming home and just like starving because it's been so long since they've eaten something. Like that's really like, if you're coming home starving after games and stuff, that's really where we can put something in right after the game to kind of help with that recovery process.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So just to summarize kind of everything we've talked about today, when it comes to young athletes, the requirements as far as fueling in and around sport are very similar to those of older adults. We really want to focus on the macronutrients, make sure they're eating enough, hydrating enough, making sure they're choosing good food choices as well. Your parents and caregivers, you guys really guide their food choices. Your young athletes, no matter their age, should definitely be involved in the process. I know Chris here is a big advocate for getting kids involved in packing their lunches, helping cooking.
Even going to a store and buying.
Yeah, because when they're involved, they're more likely to participate, more likely to eat the food they're eating or just be, more motivated about making healthier choices.
They're more invested.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to find the word. And then also it takes some of the work off of you guys, parents and caregivers.
Yeah, the thing I like to think about it with like young athletes, like youth athletes is that it's more of a collaborative approach. So if you think of like non-athletes, your general kids that just go to school, come home, do their homework, like that aren't involved in sports, that can be a more passive approach to nutrition for them. So that's like the parents kind of buy the food, provide it, and they just eat whatever's there. But especially for our young athletes, like we talked about today, there's a lot of decisions they need to be making and a lot of things they need to be doing when they're at school or like outside of the home. And so they need to be set up with the tools for success there. And so again, it needs to be a more collaborative approach so that they're invested and they still want to make those good choices and do the right things for their health and for their athletic performance.
Yeah. And, you're not going to be with them all the time. If they're lucky enough to go play in college or just be in club activities beyond, they're going to need the knowledge and the skills to know how to do so. So teach them now. Energy requirements will change, and as well as your plate portions. They can change day to day, in season, off season. So just really matching your plate and your fueling to your training needs.
Yep. And then, more generally, we want to make sure that we have a well-rounded diet. So we want to make sure that we're getting all three of the macronutrients. We want to make sure that we're getting lots of vitamins and minerals from fruits and vegetables and all of our food sources. So really just eating all kinds of foods, being more adventurous, like not eating just chips and white bread and chicken nuggets, just encouraging a more varied diet.
Yeah, and going off of that, convenience foods like energy bars and protein shakes, those things are great and they serve a purpose, but we don't want to rely on those. So really making sure we have whole foods, complete meals. Like Michael said, it's better to have a meal than just rely on like a pack of goldfish.
Yeah, and I think those convenience foods, like you were kind of saying, is we don't want those to be the foundation of our diet. Yes. We want them to supplement like the other things that we're doing because they do, like, they're convenient. They do serve a purpose, but it's just like, that's not the only thing we want to be doing.
Yes.
And then knowing those signs of dehydration, making sure that we're staying hydrated. That's, just great for general health. It's also, being hydrated helps you stay mentally checked in during school and stuff. You learn more, get a better education, all that kind of stuff. Yes. And then just knowing that kind of timing around workouts, the practices, games, stuff like that, and implementing that can make a huge difference.
Yeah. So I think that's it for today. We kind of summed up everything.
Do we want to check for questions? Do we have any questions?
All right. If you guys have questions or they pop up afterwards, you can find both of our email addresses or just the general info address at our website, theenduranceedge.com. Feel free to send an email there, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. And I think next week, stay tuned on the next webinar. There might be some changes there, but we will let you guys know.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.